What would it take for you to trust someone? Trust that they love you. Trust that they're completely committed to you. And what would it take for that trust to be broken? The author A.W. Tozer said, what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. Like any relationship, what we think about God, positive or negative, it determines whether we want to know him or not. So when someone says, no, I don't believe in God, my question is, which God don't you believe in? What if the God that we don't believe in, or the God we don't trust, isn't actually the real God, the God of the Bible? And if you knew that knowing this God would make you happier than anyone or anything else, wouldn't you want to meet him? What we see in Genesis is that God gives Adam and Eve life and breath and everything they need to flourish. They're free, they're fulfilled, they're secure, they're blissfully happy, and they lack nothing. See, this is a God who gives them an entire paradise of yes and just a single tree of no. All he asks is that they trust him. He says, you're free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. A paradise of yes, a single tree of no. But why would eating from that tree be so significant? Well, because sometimes small gestures mean something much bigger. Like, imagine if someone takes off their wedding ring and just hurls it into the sea. They're just throwing away a tiny piece of metal, right? I mean, it's no big deal, but what it represents is huge. The effects relationally would be deep and damaging. It would be like that with eating from this tree. Like a loving father to his child, God's saying, Adam, Eve, I love you. I built this paradise for you, but for this paradise to remain a paradise, you have to trust me to be God. Trust me that I know what's best for your happiness. If you eat from this tree, you will be saying to me, I don't trust you. I know better than you what's best for me. You'd be saying, I can do better. Get out of my life. So God's saying, if you choose independence from me, ultimately there's nothing there for you. Please trust me on this. There is no greater happiness apart from me. It doesn't exist. The author C.S. Lewis said that all of history has been the long, terrible story of mankind trying to find something other than God which will make him happy. And this moment in Genesis chapter 3, this moment in the shadow of this tree, this is ground zero. Now, yeah, of course, we've got questions about talking serpents, but this is about us. This is about Adam and Eve, you and I. It's about what comes into our minds when we think about God. So the serpent says, did God really say that you must not eat from any tree in the garden? Now, of course, God didn't say that. It's a paradise of yes and a single tree of no. But you hear what the serpent's saying. God is mean-spirited. He wants to keep you down. He doesn't want you to be happy. He's keeping the best things from you. Why trust him? And then the serpent says, you will not certainly die if you eat from the tree. He's saying, there are no consequences if you ignore what God has said. It won't hurt you. There's no judgment. In fact, if you eat from the tree, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God. I mean, it has such a familiar ring to it, doesn't it? God is not great. He is not trustworthy. He wants to repress you and ruin your life. He doesn't want your happiness. And I wonder if that's what comes into your mind when you think about God. Not as the great source of happiness, but as the great spoiler of happiness. When we start thinking about God as not trustworthy, not wanting us to be happy, then of course we won't listen to him or love him. But for many of us, the God we've rejected or the God we feel has rejected us is actually not the God revealed here in the Bible. Is it possible we've believed lies about him? The same ones that the serpent tells here? And think of it from God's perspective. What would it feel like if someone you love to the bottom of your heart, what if someone you love believed lies about you? And what if, because of those lies, they pushed you away? But Adam and Eve's motivation for pushing God away goes deeper. The reason that they don't trust God isn't just because they lack facts about him. It's not simply that they've been lied to. The reason they choose not to trust God is because they trust something else for their happiness instead. The Bible says you and I push God away because we've replaced him with something or someone else that we think is better, more attractive than God. And we see exactly what it is in Genesis chapter 3. The serpent says, when you eat from the tree, your eyes will be open and you will be like God. See, most of us think that being like God will make us happier than trusting God, right? Because of that, we want to de-God God, if I can put it that way. We want to make our own rules because we think that'll work out better for us. And this is one of the central threads of the whole Bible. Will human beings trust their Creator, or will they give their hearts away to someone or something else instead? Will they recognize that God is God and be happy in that? Or will they try to find greater happiness elsewhere? And this, by the way, is what the Bible means when it talks about sin. Sin is putting anything or anyone in God's place. When something or someone else becomes more desirable to us than the one who made us, sustains us, and gives us every good thing we enjoy, that is sin. Someone put it like this: the essence of sin is not so much that we want bad things, it's that we want things too badly. God warns that sin always damages us and others, often in unforeseen ways, and in the end, sin leads to death and judgment. And that's why the first two of God's 10 commandments warn us so strongly against putting other gods in his place. But Adam and Eve make their choice. They trust the serpent rather than God. They bite down on the fruit like a fish going for a baited hook. They don't realize how deadly it is until it's too late. And like most sin, just for a moment, it tastes really good. Genesis says that as soon as they eat it, the eyes of both of them were opened. But what are their eyes opened to? Not a happier life as they'd hoped, but a crippling sense of shame. It says that suddenly they realized that they were naked. Now, this isn't just being aware of physical nakedness. It goes much deeper than that. They feel morally naked. They're ashamed of what they've done. They know they're guilty, but they don't want to admit it, and so they do what guilty people do. They try to hide themselves. They try to cover up, and well, we've been doing the same thing ever since. How often we hide behind appearances, the status we have, the money we earn, conspicuous consumption, conspicuous religiosity, the faked out smiles of social media. We do it because without them we feel naked. But then, there is something just so beautiful here in this chapter. How does God respond to what they've done? It says, the Lord God called to the man. You see, he comes after him. God's saying, look, come on, you can't hide from me. You can't cover up the truth about yourselves. I know everything you've done. I know everything you are. But still, I want you. Still, I'm coming for you. I'm calling out to you, and I'm going to clothe you. I'm going to provide for you. Yes, of course, there is anger at what Adam and Eve have done. There is a price to be paid for treating their Creator in that way, a price that we've been paying ever since. He says from this point on there'll be pain and conflict between the sexes. Work will be hard and exhausting. Suffering will enter the world. There's banishment from the sweet intimacy they'd once enjoyed with their Creator. And this, by the way, is why the world we live in now is such a bewildering cocktail of glory and garbage. We're made in God's image, but now, to use the Bible's phrase, we're also in Adam. We bear his family likeness. And yes, the serpent was lying. There is a price to pay for sin. One day they will both die. And so will all of those who are in Adam, including you and me. But in the shadow of the tree, something wonderful happens. God's words of judgment are mixed with words of love. He promises that humanity will continue. Eve will become the mother of all the living. And then, as if he's tenderly embracing them, God provides clothing for them. And the way he does that is really significant. An animal is sacrificed so that they can be clothed. What if this is an anticipation of some greater sacrifice to come that will protect them in some greater way? But most remarkably of all, God promises that the offspring of Eve will at some point in the future crush the serpent's head. In other words, someone will one day deal with all the garbage and restore the glory. He'll undo the death and dysfunction. He'll open the way for human beings to return, to run back into the arms of the loving God who made them. But that is not the end of the sentence. He will crush your head, and the serpent will strike his heel. It's an image of being painfully and fatally struck down. So this person will only be able to achieve all this at a terrible cost to himself. This person, they will defeat death, but in the process, he will himself be killed.
God will put an end to suffering, but only by suffering himself. Do you see how different this God is to the one we often have in our minds? How different to every other God you could name. He isn't detached or uncaring. He takes our pain and sorrow with such deadly seriousness that he promises here to enter into it himself.
And so as God meets Adam and Eve in the shadow of this tree, yes, there is judgment. He can't just pretend that sin doesn't matter, sweeping it under the carpet like a corrupt government official. To tolerate evil is not to be loving, it's the opposite. Sin must be punished if God is to be just. But at the same time, there is unexpected, undeserved, unimaginable love. Love that is prepared to go to extraordinary lengths for the sake of the beloved. What comes into our mind when we think about God is really important, but much more important is what comes into God's mind when he thinks about us. And what comes into his mind is love. Love we really don't deserve. God so loves the world that he will one day meet humanity again in the shadow of another tree, a wooden cross. And once again, rightful judgment will be mixed with extraordinary love. So, what would it take for you to trust God? Trust that he loves you. Trust that he's completely committed to you. Would you trust God if he were to call out to you in love, just as he called out to Adam and Eve? Would you trust him if he were to become human and then on your behalf live out the sinless life that you and I find it impossible to live? Would you trust him if he were to clothe you in such a way that you no longer felt you needed to hide, either from him or from other people? Would you trust him if he took the punishment you deserve in your place? Would you trust him if in love he gave up his life for you?